Your experiences are important considerations when seeking and finding your design. What tasks and what projects have influenced you? God will use even the negative experiences to complete your design. Hi, and welcome to our third session in our design course. In this session, I want to talk to you about the E in design. We all go through many different events in life, twists and turns, good, bad, upturns, downturns, and these events make up your life experiences. Now, some are painful, while others are delightful and enjoyable. Some are more memorable, while others might be a bit mundane. And still others can be revolutionary and change your life. The majority of our experiences can be broken down into these four brief categories. And the first is experiences of pain. I know, painful experiences are, well, painful, obviously. And the depth of the pain will add to the depth or the impact that your life will have and also on your future. These experiences, especially the painful ones, can include so many things that alter your future, alter your mentality, alter your attitude, such as a tragic family death or a broken bone or a painful breakup. Could be a catastrophic loss or the destructiveness of an addiction, a cancer diagnosis, a heart attack, and so many more. These experiences are not only painful when they happen, but they can create painful memories. And sometimes they can seem completely worthless. I mean, you think about it, you say, life would be much better without them. However, contrary to how you feel, these experiences can prove to be extremely valuable to our lives because God has promised to convert suffering into maturity. He can convert pain into wisdom. And a lot of times, so when you go into it or you're going through it, it doesn't seem that way, does it? I often say it this way: faith is living in advance what you will only understand in reverse. These things don't show its fruitfulness until later, so you've got to go through it with faith. The Apostle Paul may have even been reflecting on this in his own life when he wrote these words in Romans. Let's read it together. Go. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. And that's what this whole design course is about. To know that you've been called to be a part of God's plan and live that according to His purpose. And when you do, He promises that He'll take even the bad and convert it for good. You see, God never wastes a hurt. And if you will trust Him, He is well known for taking your barren seasons and turning them into fruitful ones. But you need to trust Him and follow Him and live for His purposes. He's in control, and He's a good God. But often we won't see that value in the beginning. In order for God to fulfill His promises, we have to stay under His covering and care. Got to stay under it. It's like an umbrella. If you move outside of the umbrella, you get rained on. You stay under that umbrella, it doesn't matter how hard it rains, you're okay. 1 Peter 4:19 says it in this way. So then, those who suffer according to God's will should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. Did you hear that? Peter instructs us to suffer according to God's will, or suffer according to the will of God. Interesting. I was thinking, if there's a way to suffer that's according to the will of God, he's probably inferring that there's a way to suffer that is not according to the will of God. That's right. I can suffer poorly, can't I? Or I can suffer in a way that excretes bitterness or hatred, revenge, hate. I tell people, suffering will change you, but not necessarily for the better. You have to choose that. Let me reiterate that. Suffering will change you, but not necessarily for the better. You must choose that. Why? Because suffering poorly can cause us to heal wrongly. You say, heal wrongly? How can you do that? You know, sometimes God has to deal with me when I'm yet wounded, because I can be wounded, but yet fiery, reactionary. I can hold bitterness and hatred. And all of that begins to seethe inside, leach inside me like a cancer. One person said, hate always destroys the vessel in which it's contained much sooner than upon whom it is poured. Another man said it this way, hate or bitterness is like drinking a glass of poison and waiting for the other person to die. You see, when we suffer wrongly, it's like drinking the poison of hatred or bitterness. And then it becomes absorbed into my heart. And what happens is it destroys me long before it destroys anybody else. So what God wants to do is, as we may get over an event, we still may be wounded inside, and we, quote, heal, but we heal poorly. So we're back to work, but we have changed. We've mutated. We heal wrongly. I remember when I was in high school, I was the height that I am now, 4'1", I think it is. And so I wanted to play basketball, but we didn't have a 5 foot and under, 4 foot and under league. So I thought, well, I'm just going to play like I'm a basketball player. And I remember watching them dunk the ball, and I thought, man, I want to do that. So one day after school, I got a basketball, and the side baskets had these bleachers that came down. And when the basket was out and the bleachers were out, you could almost jump. Maybe it was another 8, 9 feet out, but you could jump because you're parallel to that basket. It was a ways out, but you could, if you jumped far enough, like a running start, touch that basket. So I thought, I'm going to take a basketball and run as fast as I can and jump and stuff the basket, just to feel what it feels like to dunk the basket. Well, I did that. I took the bleachers as a tarmac, and man, like a prop plane, I just started my engines up and I started running out, and I leaped out over that chasm that's got to be, from that, where there, probably 8 feet down to a 10-foot basket, but I was up there. I felt like a professional. I dunked that ball, and I grabbed onto the rim, just like those guys do, and I swung out. I felt like a hero until I came down. I held on a little too long, and when I came down, my foot was under me, and I fell on my ankle, broke my ankle. I cannot tell you the sheer pain that surged through my body. I had to have people help me up. I couldn't put on my street clothes. I had to put it in a package, and I got on the bus that was for athletes. I felt terrible, but took me home. Now, this was on a Friday. We lived in a little place called Trail, Oregon. I mean, it's the population so small that when someone plugs in their electric razor, all the lights dim, one of those kinds of towns. And one side it says, welcome to Trail. The other side says goodbye. And so it's a teeny little town. Well, we had a little dispensary, like a clinic out there. But by the time I got home Friday night, it was closed. Monday was a holiday. So Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, Monday night, before I could get into the clinic on Tuesday. Now, by this time, of course, my ankle was swollen up like a basketball, and it was so painful. But when I finally got in there, they took a x-ray of it, and already it's starting to calcify, right? And so the doctor looked at it and did the x-ray, and he said, well, we're going to have to reset this ankle because it's off to the side. We're going to reset it. And I said, will it hurt? He said, oh, it'll be a little uncomfortable, but other than that, it'll be fine. He lied to me. That word uncomfortable means you will have night horrors about this event. He didn't say anything about that. And so he was talking to me. I had one boot on. The other was, of course, wrapped in this ace bandage. And so he took it off, and he was looking at it and he said, okay, yeah, we'll have to move it from here to here. And he was moving and feeling around. Every time he pushed, it was very painful. And then he grabbed my ankle like this and he said, wow, those are really nice boots that you got on. Where'd you get them? And I just was about to tell him I got it at Sears at that time. I just was about to tell him where I got it when he went whack and set my ankle. Well, I jumped so high I had to peel myself off of the ceiling. When I came back down, I let out a bloody scream that I've never since even tried to achieve. I came down, I had tears rolling out my eyes, and he settled me down. He says, it's okay, it's okay. I said, why didn't you just leave it alone? Wouldn't it heal? He said, if I left it alone, it would heal, but it would heal incorrectly. I said, you mean I could walk on it? He said, yeah, you could probably walk on it. It'd be a little crooked, but it would heal incorrectly, and you wouldn't have full use of it. But because I've reset it, not only will your bones heal, but it could actually get stronger than it was. But now it'll heal correctly. I thought, Now, at that time, I didn't believe it at all. But today I look back and I am thankful that that doctor took the time and the risk to reset my leg and my ankle so that it would heal correctly. God's like that, isn't he? He risks the unpopularity to reach into our lives and set things aright so that not that we'll heal, but that we'll heal correctly. Those are painful experiences. Many of you watching this might attest to having painful pasts. And those experiences tend to affect our present decisions, our perspectives more than you'll ever know. And unless you're able to make peace with your past, it won't work. You'll always have a bad healing. I tell people it's never too late to have a happy childhood. You say, well, what do you mean? That's past. No, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. How do you explain that? Well, let me tell you just a sliver of my past so that you'll understand. My parents divorced when I was very young, and I remember them fighting a great deal. In fact, one of my earliest memories was when I must have been 6 years old. I remember holding on to my mom, pleading with my dad not to hit her anymore. They split up a short time later, and the four of us kids went to live with our mom. Now, we were being raised in a very small home in a lush valley of Palolo, just outside of Honolulu, Hawaii. But my mother, being a waitress, couldn't afford to raise us four kids. It was just way too much to try to support us on minimum wage at that time and tips. So she asked my dad to take us. He was in the Army, and he would get extra pay because he has extra dependents or children. So we went with him, and that's when we ended up in Japan, where he was stationed for 3 years. But I remember it was a very, very difficult upbringing because he had remarried, and they had three other girls at that time, and we were sort of like an intrusion onto that new family of theirs, and I understand that. I mean, we were from a whole different universe, and here we are all of a sudden, hello, four of us, you get to feed us, wash our clothes, take care of us, when my stepmom had three others. And so it was a very, very tough time. My father was quite a disciplinarian. He disciplined us according to the military code. It's like he laid down the stripes until we saw stars. That was it. That was his principle. Well, time went on when things got so hard that my oldest sister left. My older brother left, went to boarding school. And then the next brother left, and then finally I was left with my dad. But things weren't going really well. In fact, a couple of times my brother would have to be sent to the hospital because of some over discipline, some punishment that was a little bit more than it should have been. And there were times when I would have red stripes on my back, and I remember going to PE, not wanting to dress down for PE because I knew all the buddies would be making fun of me because of the straps that I had, the welts on my legs. So it was a very tough time. And I remember at 13 years old, I was sent out with a suitcase to a boarding school in California. And I was on my own from that point on, 13 years old. Working in the summers, going to school in the winters. I was on my own from 13 years old. It was a tough time. I even remember my mom, when she was dying, I asked my father to send me to go see her before she died. And we were in Oregon at that time, and she was in Hawaii. And my dad said, no, she's not really dying. She's just using that as an excuse to get me to pay for you to go back. She doesn't have to pay for it. So I said, well, I don't know. She just said she's dying. Well, I went back to school. A few weeks later, I got a telegram in the middle of my math class that said, your mother passed away this morning at 10:30. And I was so distraught. I remember hating my dad with a passion. I went outside the schoolroom and I began to beat my fist into an orange tree in California until I bled. I hated God. I hated my dad. I hated everybody. And that's when I went the opposite way, got steeped into drugs and went into a rock and roll group, left home, lived on my own. But at 19 years old, I received Christ. Something happened. Everything changed. And after a while, I entered Bible college to study for the ministry when one person heard my testimony and my background, and they said, Wayne, if you had it all over again, if you could have your druthers, wouldn't you want a better childhood? And at first I wanted to say, absolutely. But then I'd think about it and I'd say, I don't think so. What? They'd say with incredulous eyes. No, I don't think so. Why? I said, because, God is in control and our God's a good God. And I think he saw where I was and he saw my future and what I would need to do, the ministry that I would be involved in, the people whose lives I would be a part of, people that I would serve and the purposes of God, and maybe some of the suffering I would have to go through. And he looked at all of that and he said, Wayne, you're going to have to fare well in these in order to fulfill my purposes for you. And so the only way that I can train you for this is if I thought Harvard could train you for that, I would have sent you to Harvard. Princeton, I would have sent you to Princeton. But the only way to train you for this is to allow you to go through a very tough, painful experience of a past. And I will walk with you all the way through it. And if you'll come through it holding my hand, you will have gained everything you'll need to apprehend your future. See, God's in control. And if I suffer according to the will of God, he'll turn and convert everything, even painful experiences, into that which would be fruitful. This is what I think that Paul meant when he wrote these words. And it goes like this. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the same comfort we ourselves received from God. Here's the redeeming factor. Our sufferings can give us great insight and compassion for others that may go through similar circumstances. So remember, no matter what you've gone through, God will never waste a hurt. And he will not only redeem them, but then convert your painful pasts into a future and a hope. Think about it. Perhaps your parents split up when you were little and you had a hard time growing up. When you encounter someone else going through the same situation, you'll be able to relate to them, encourage and support them because you've gone through the very same thing before. A second category of experience can be experiences not of pain, but of gain. Hopefully, you've had at least a measure of gainful experiences, not just painful ones. Joseph in the Old Testament had gainful experiences that followed directly after a painful one, didn't he? Often, gainful experiences follow painful ones, if you will suffer, as Peter says, according to the will of God. Because after suffering, being thrown into prison, later Joseph became the second most powerful man in the known world beside the Pharaoh of Egypt. And then he used his position and his prominence to advance the kingdom of God. It would be his forgiveness and his acceptance toward his brothers who deceived him and brought him such pain. His forgiveness and acceptance, it would be that which would save the whole Israelite nation from starvation until God would raise up Moses and they would finally leave Egypt after 430 years. We find in Genesis 50 and verse 20 these profound words. It says this, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive." Isn't that great? God will sprinkle on some, pour onto others experiences of gain in order that through His blessings, they might be a blessing to others. And when that happens, please be faithful. God will use your life experiences and your victories to encourage and uphold someone else who needs your help. Often, if you think about it, the greatest tests in life are not poverty, it's prosperity. It's not how you endure pain, but how you steward gain. It's not hard to be humble when you're impoverished, but will that still hold true when we are prosperous? We will all stand before God, who will hold us accountable for how we stewarded our pains as well as our gains, our sufferings as well as our celebrations. And in the end, everything will be revealed, and that's what will show up in the end. Funny story is told about these two wealthy brothers about stewarding. We're talking about stewarding gain. These two wealthy brothers attended the same church, but both of them were super stingy and prideful. But then one of them died, and the brother, the one who was deceased, came to the pastor and told him that he would donate $1 million to the church if he would tell the people at his brother's funeral that his brother was a saint. The pastor said, "Well, I just can't lie. He was a scoundrel and a cheat." Now, the other wealthy brother said, "But aren't you in a building program? Don't you need $1 million?" So the pastor said, "Well, okay." And he agreed to this. Well, the day of the funeral came, and the pastor stood up and said, "This brother here that was deceased, this guy was a scoundrel and a cheat and stingy. He was terrible. Now, a man who only thought of himself is in that casket." And then he quickly added, "But compared to his brother, this guy was a saint." You see, everything's going to be revealed in the end. What you are, what you're not. Steward your gains well, your pains well. It's a part of your life experiences. The third category of experiences is your experiences in the Spirit. All of us are going to go through some sort of spiritual experience in our lives. Maybe your experience is when you received salvation, or a time when God healed you or saved you from what could have been a debilitating disease or accident. Whatever it is, your spiritual experiences affect a large part of who you are. Paul's spiritual experiences completely changed his life. Remember who he was before he became a follower of Christ? He was Saul of Tarsus, a man widely feared and known for persecuting Christians all over. In fact, he was the one who allowed Stephen, a follower of Christ, to be stoned to death. We read about Saul's BC days in an earlier chapter of the book of Acts. And it says this, "Saul was in hearty agreement with putting him," or Stephen, "to death. And on that day, a great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem. And they were all scattered throughout all the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles." And then it says, "Paul began ravaging the church, entering house after house and dragging off men and women. He would put them in prison." You know, the climax of Saul's story is when he meets Christ face to face. And his life takes a 180-degree turn. Take a look at this passage. It says, "As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?' 'Who are you, Lord?' Saul asked. 'I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting,' he replied. 'Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do.'" After this incredible experience, Paul's life shifts drastically. He went from being a man who was bent on destroying the followers of Jesus, to one of the biggest influencers for Christ in all of history. Let me ask you a question. Do you remember how you came to Christ? Do you remember how your life was dramatically changed? Do you remember when He healed you or when you escaped a brush with death? You are here today only by the grace of God, and our spiritual experiences will always redefine who we are and what we're doing. And if we will listen to what God says about us and spend time with Him, we too will be transformed like Paul. And though there may be many, many more categories of life experiences, let me just give you one more. And the last we'll address will be your educational experiences, not just your pain or your gain or your spiritual, but now your educational experience. In the book of Acts, Paul said this about his upbringing. He said, "I am a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today." What have you learned and studied? See, these things will help open up new doors for your future. In Paul's case, his upbringing and learning as a Jewish boy allowed him access to great knowledge about God and His Word. Your educational experiences will define what you know. But here's the gem. Your educational experiences don't just end after high school or college. They need to continue for your entire life. Here at New Hope, we emphasize the importance of being a lifelong learner and continuously being teachable. Whether you feel that you had an excellent education or not, whether you feel that you might be lacking a lot of it, you can still continue learning as long as you're on this earth. Whatever you have learned or are still learning, God will use for your good and for His glory. We have 2 colleges, one in Hawaii called PAC Rim, or Pacific Rim Christian University, and one in Eugene, Oregon, where I'm president of it currently, and that's called New Hope Christian College. Here we want to train young men and women in the excellence of ministry and the depth of biblical character. I want to encourage you to, if you're thinking about college, take a look at that. I received an honorary doctorate in my 30s or 40s, but I didn't finish an earned doctorate until I was in my 60s. You never stop learning. You keep going because there's so much to learn, and you're never too old to start learning again. As you reflect on this lesson this week, take some time to look back at the various experiences in your life. How has God used them to shape you into the person that you are today? Think of the different categories of experiences we discussed in this session. Painful experiences. Have you made peace with your past? Your gainful experiences, have you stewarded that? Your prominence or your mantle or what God has given to you, the blessings, are you stewarding that well? What about your spiritual experiences, what God has done in your life? And then your educational experiences. How are you using them? Because God will take all of those things and pin them together, connect them together, and that will help you discern your design. And when you begin to understand how God created you so uniquely, you'll begin to understand what a blast it is to serve God because you found the design that He has for you.